is Khalid from Safescope. And obviously, as I said, the plan is really to cover the new roles and the duty holders under the CDM regulations today. So what we'll be covering today would be introduction to Building Safety Act very quickly. Then we'll move to the introduction to new roles and the duty holders under the Building Safety Act. What are the main requirements of those new roles? How these roles will apply on a project, and those duties under these roles, i.e. the client, designer, etc. What is expected from these new roles from principal designer, competency criteria? What are the transitional arrangements in place? And there's a little quiz really at the end as well. 5 questions only, just to capture ourselves and see whether we understood what now during the session, main features, etc. It's not to test your, it's not a test of memory or something, but just a quick catch up really to say whether we have understood, the mechanisms, etc. And obviously Q&A, and hopefully the time allow us really to do it really. So if we're ready, we can kick it start. As you all know, we are Safescope, and we offer CDM services and whatnot, but we are jumping into BSA services as well. So we'll be offering the client BSA advisor, principal design, and principal contractor advisor under Building Safety Act as well. Okay, Building Safety Act. Let's start. Very quick introduction again. Obviously, this whole thing started, unfortunately, with the Grenfell Tower tragedy in 2017. 24-story tower block of flats in London, and 72 people, unfortunately, died, and 70 people got injured. The actual tower was originally constructed in 74, and there were major renovations in 2015, 2016 sort of time. And the fire started as a result of electrical fire in the fridge freezer on the 4th floor. Obviously, the worst UK residential fire since World War II. Now, what happened afterwards is, it was an independent review of the building regulations and the fire safety was commissioned, and the cause was established that it was probably why it became so deadly was the external cladding consisting of combustible aluminum composite and external insulation that resulted in rapid spread of fire externally. As a result of the independent review, which was carried out by Dame Judith Hackett, the review report came out as interim, and the final report came out in May 18, called Building a Safety Future.
So, Khalid, your slides aren't changing.
Okay. So let's try share it again. Can you see the change now? Are they changing now?
Yes. Yeah.
So if I move to the next one, if it doesn't change, please shout. So I'm on the 4th slide. It would say the 4th of 15 now. Right, sorry. So the findings of the Judith review were, and which is important for us really to understand what were those findings, and on those findings all these new changes are based, i.e. she said roles and responsibilities of those procuring, designing, constructing and maintaining buildings are unclear. So there's a problem. The roles are not really clear in terms of who is who doing what on the building project. Regulations and guidance can be ambiguous and inconsistent. The process that drives compliance with the building safety requirements are weak and complex and with poor record and change control in too many cases. Now, the important thing she was also hinting at is the competence across the system is very patchy. Product labeling, etc., is opaque and insufficient. And obviously, she talked about the high-rise buildings, and the voice of residents often goes unheard as part of the findings, really. What came out? I'm on the slide 5 now. If it hasn't changed to anyone, guys, please let me know. What came as a result of those findings in the report was this Building Safety Act. And Building Safety Act is a huge piece of legislation. It's quite a massive document, and it results in so many new regulations have been created and so many regulations have been changed. The crux of it is that it creates a building safety regulator, i.e. Health and Safety Executive, HSE, now have become the building safety regulator as well, and a building control regulator. National Construction Products Regulator has been established. There's a protection of leaseholders in block of flats, involvements of residents in high-rise building management, responsibilities for building owners that have been created, and framework for design, construction, and management for the built environment industry. The phrase she uses for construction is the built environment industry, and there's a new kind of revised framework in her mind. And there's new Fire Safety Act 2021 has come up as well, which clarifies the shared block of flats, who the designated person is, and they are responsible for external walls and the flat entrance doors as well in their fire risk assessment. Now, it's a huge piece of legislation. We'll try to filter it down only to the purpose, to the new duties and the roles, etc., very quickly. But I'll just cover. I'm on the slide 6 now. Now, what it does, and it's almost a repeat, is the new building safety regulator has come into action, which will be HSE. HSE have taken an additional role of new building safety regulator, responsible for the building control now throughout the UK. Higher risk buildings, there are different set of requirements, and one may wonder what is the definition of higher building, which I'll come to that. Changes to building regulations and creation of new roles and duty roles. There have been changes, obviously, to the building regulations to create all these roles. Changes to construction products and creation of National Construction Products Regulator have been established, and changes to Defective Premises Act as well. There are 6 parts to the regulation and 9 schedules. Part 1, introduction. Part 2, regulator and functions, i.e. the building safety regulator. Part 3 of the regulation brings the changes, amends the Building Act 84, and resultantly changes the building regulations as well, which is to do the design and construction of building work. Part 4 is about the high-rise buildings and also the requirements in occupation. Part 5 of the Building Safety Act is the provision about safety and standards. A number of different arrangements and provisions have come into action: new homes ombudsman, construction products, architects' competence, dealing with complaints from social housing residents, etc., etc. It's a huge, piece of legislation. Now, what it does, before we go into that, we're going to talk about what's the definition of high-risk building, because that is talked about in the Building Safety Act quite a lot. So a higher-risk building is any building which is at least 18 meters high from the ground level, or contains at least 7 stories, along with and contains at least 2 residential units. So not that any commercial building is out of it. It has to have 2 residential units to be able to be called a higher risk building. Now, it also includes care homes, also includes hospitals, and that's the definition of a high risk building. It excludes hotels, secure residential institutions, military barracks, etc. are excluded. So purely a commercial building without any residential unit will not be called a high-risk buildings, and these regulations which apply to high-risk buildings won't apply to it. There are some diagrams as well, how to measure 18 meters, and that is the measured from the lowest part from the ground floor if it's on the sloping ground, and to the last floor. the level, that's called the 18-meter. The basement floors is not included in the 18-meter measurement. Okay. Now, what the Building Safety Act does, it creates a number of different regulations. It creates the high-risk building regulations, description and supplementary provision, etc. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but it just gives you an idea of how significant the Building Safety Act is and how huge it is. For example, the high-risk buildings, management of safety risks, England regulations, etc. And there's a one down there is it still hasn't come into action, which we are expecting shortly. It also modifies, which is more relevant to us, is that it modifies the Building Act 1984, which resultantly also alters and amends and modifies the Building Regulations 2010. It also creates the Building Regulation, etc. Amendment Regulation 2023, which is very important one for us because that's the one which will trigger all these new roles on building projects, and also creates the higher high risk building procedures regulation 2023. The Building Safety Act also modifies the regulatory reform fire safety order 2005. Some changes to it. Also creates fire safety England regulations 2022. Now you can imagine how many different set of regulations has come out and changed and new created as a result of Building Safety Act. And it also has an impact for the building control, the approved inspector side of things, really, and the new regulation, the building approved inspector and review of decisions have come into action already. And also other regulations as a result of the Building Safety Act or the Building Safety Regulators charges. Obviously, the HSE wants to charge for everything that they would do under this Building Safety Act, and different transitional arrangements and the commencement regulations. We got up to 4. Number 4 have already come into action, and we're expecting a 5th one to come into action shortly. So in a nutshell, if we can describe it, what Building Safety Act does, it creates, if you see the yellow side on the left side, is in yellow, is all those new regulations relevant to higher risk buildings have come into action. Now, the regulations also creates the building regulation. I'm talking now in green at the bottom of the slides. The building regulations, amendment regulations, the building high risk building procedures, which in turn have an effect on the building regulation 2010, and obviously new part have been introduced, part 2A in building regulations, which is to do with the duty holders and competence, etc. On the right hand side, it creates the Building Safety Act commencement regulations 1 to 4 charges, but also it creates the approved inspector and the changes to that profession as well. Even the name has been changed now. We're supposed to call them the building inspectors. And then on the right-hand side in orange, the section 1556 of the Building Safety Act modifies the regulatory reform safety order of 2005. New Act, Fire Safety Act has been created, and new regulation of Fire Safety England Regulation 2022 has come into action as well. So this just gives you in a nutshell, in a visual way, what changes have come into action, and most of them have become applicable from 1st of October. Now, that's kind of in a very quick way, briefly, just summing up what is coming into action from the Building Safety Act. I don't want to go through into the depth of it because there's a lot more that one could talk about, but not really what changes to the building control profession and the high risk building, etc. Because the purpose is to talk about the new roles that have come into action. Hence, I'll keep it very brief there. Now, what are the new roles and the duty holders that have come into action, come into place? Now, under Building Safety Act, from 1st of October 2023, already a few days have already passed from previous Sunday. The new roles have been created, and new roles are called client, designers, principal designer, principal contractor, and contractors. Surprisingly, those are the same roles we already have under the CDM regulations. So effectively, they have created a new set of duty holders sitting parallel to the CDM regulations. So in effect, on any project, you would have a client duties under CDM regulation, but also client duties under the Building Safety Act, a different set of duties, not the same duties, obviously. The duties are different. If you see green, these are the duty holders under CDM 2015 and almost similar duty holders under Building Safety Act. The client will have now duties under Building Safety Act. Designers, all designers involved in a project will have duties under Building Safety Act. There's now need of appointment of a principal designer under Building Safety Act as well. So there will be two principal designers, one under the CDM regulations and one under the Building Safety Act, because they're two different things really to work. A principal contractor appointed under CDM 2015 will have those duties, but also there's another set of requirements on principal contractors under Building Safety Act. Contractors will have duties under CDM regulation, but also now under Building Safety Act. And there are duties on workers under CDM 2015, which are, not that significant in comparison to client designers, etc. But there are no as such duties on workers under Building Safety Act. I'm on the slide number 3 on the new roles and duty holders. Now, the situation now from 1st of October is that any client of a project will have duties under CDM 2015, but also under Building Safety Act 2022. Let's move further down, and then I'll come to the bracket of point. The designer, so any designer will have duties under CDM 2015, but also under BSA 22. Now, principal designer have duties under CDM 2015 and the duties under Building Safety Act. Now, the question is that would that be a same party acting as a principal designer under CDM regulation and Building Safety Act, or would there be two separate roles? Now, the regulations don't say that there should be one party or two, i.e., in theory, there could be two people sitting there, one as a principal designer under CDM 2015 and a principal designer sitting under Building Safety Act, focusing on the Building Safety Act. But HSC are suggesting, and the expectation is that it will be one party looking after the both duties as a principal designer. But that can be difficult as well, depending on the competence, etc., required, which I'll come and cover that. But effectively, in theory, there could be two principal designers sitting on the same project, looking at two different things, really. Now, principal contractor appointed, one needs to be appointed under CDM 2015, one needs to be appointed under Building Safety Act. Then would we expect that there will be true principal contractors on any project? No, I don't think that that would be practicable. Though legally it's possible, but in practice it won't be possible. I don't think anyone expects that on a project there will be two principal contractors. So a principal contractor now will have two set of duties on their shoulders, one under CDM, one under Building Safety Act, and all contractors will have duties under CDM 2015 and in addition Building Safety Act. Now the top one, the client, I'll put a bracket there to say what if a client advisor is appointed, because a number of projects under CDM, a client advisor is appointed under CDM 2015 to help client to fulfill their duties. Now, what happens in this case? Now, surely, same like principal designer, you would expect the same client advisor to do both jobs, or you will end up, there'll be two client advisors sitting, next to the client, really, to one helping with the CDM 2015 and one helping with BSA 22. So it will take some doing and practice and see how the things pan out, really. And how these roles will be performed in practice, but they have already come in effect and they are applicable already from 1st of October, last Sunday. Now let's see what's the difference really between Building Safety Act and CDM 2015. And the reason I'm doing this really is just to show the focus really for a client advisor or for a principal contractor or for a principal designer. Now, trying to perform those two duties, we'll see what's the difference and how huge it can be. Now, Building Safety Act is focused on compliance with the Building Regulations 2010, whereas CDM is compliance with CDM 2015 regulations, obviously, as we know. Now, there is another difference as well. The Building Safety Act applies to building work. And please remember, we're talking about the building work, whereas the CDM applies to construction work. And these are two different definitions. Building work and construction work are not the same. They are two different definitions, and I'll cover that. Now, what will be the minimum competency in order to fulfill the duties under Building Safety Act is the application of building safety building regulations. There are 23 approved documents, really, and their requirements and relevant BSI standards and other guidance that come with it. And they estimate, someone went on to estimate, there are approximately 54 documents that one needs to understand and are not, I mean, to scare you or anything really, but there are 649 different codes and standards that one, should have an understanding, not understanding, but workable, knowledge to see the what applies to where, or at least have understanding where to find the information, etc. Whereas the CDM side of things is purely focused on the application of CDM regulations and other construction health and safety related regulations. So you can see the focus is different. One is looking at building work and looking at the building regulations approved documents and the British standards, etc. Whereas the CDM is focused on the CDM 2015 and the relevant regulations, health and safety related regulations. There's also another change in the scope of the application as well. The Building Safety Act is predominantly worried about design and construction in accordance with the design, whereas the CDM 2015 is much more vast and bigger in terms of scope. Is not only is where the regulations talk about the design and construction, but construction in a safe manner as well. But then also a safer post-completion maintenance, cleaning, etc. And as we say in terms of CDM, right up to the ultimate demolition of the building. So there's a difference in scope of these two things as well. So a principal designer, a client advisor, or principal contractor looking at those two things really shouldn't really be thinking that it's a business as usual. It's not, because the focus is different of those two sets of regulations. And hence it creates a huge challenge for existing principal designers, client advisors, and those people really, among us contractors who act as principal contractor and look after the CDM side of things really. Now they have to worry about the Building Safety Act, which is with a different focus as well. Now, what's the definition? What's the difference between the definition of building work and construction work? Now, the building work is the erection or extension of a building. Now, the term building is important. We always talk about the building under building regulations. The provision or extension of a controlled service, i.e. the heating, hot water, ventilation, lighting, etc., or fittings, external windows, external doors, etc. The material alteration of a building or a control service, the work require regulation 6, material change of use, insertion of insulating materials, etc. Work involving the underpinning, work require the regulation 2, change of energy status, work requiring relating to thermal elements, roof, etc. Work requiring regulation 28, which is consequential improvement to energy performance. So that's the building work definition. And compared to the construction work, if I come to that definition, is limited. Now, if you look at the construction work under CDM regulation, that's not, it's not only talking about the buildings, it's talking about the whole construction profession. So it includes any building, which is only part of it, but civil engineering and engineering construction work, and they are all included as construction work, and hence CDM apply. So you can see the difference between two. I mean, if we just take one, the construction, alteration, conversion, fitting out, commissioning, renovation, repair, everything is a CDM work. Preparation of a site is a CDM work. The assembly on site of a prefabricated element to form a structure is a CDM work. Removal of a structure, demolition, etc., is CDM work. It's not a building work in that definition, but it comes under CDM. So the requirements or the definitions are different, if you bear that in mind. So that creates a difference there as well. Now, what are the main requirements under the new rules, etc.? I hope I've cleared the difference between two as well. Sorry, if there's any quick question onto these, differences, please let me know now. What I'm trying to say is to clearly map out really, how these two set of regulations sit. The impression is that, there will be a principal designer, and by the way, now they'll be looking after the Building Safety Act as well. Is not simple as saying as it is. It's not. The roles are different, the focus is different, and the competency requirements itself are different. The definition is different. So where CDM may apply on a project, the Building Safety Act requirements may not apply. Where CDM applies, you see the difference really, because the building work definition is narrower. Where building regulation or Building Safety Act and the building regulations apply, the CDM will apply, because the CDM is much more faster definition. So you see the difference. Whereas if CDM applies to project, it doesn't mean that Building Safety Act requirements will apply. However, if Building Safety Act requirements apply to a project, then almost 99% of the time, the CDM requirements will apply to that project as well. Okay, is that okay? Can we move forward now? Yeah, I take it as a yes. Now, what are the main requirements under Building Safety Act? We'll go one by one, and I'll explain each one when a little bit later. Now, I'll keep on highlighting the words which are very important for us to understand in order to decipher the Building Safety Act requirements. Now, the Act applies to all building work, and I'll keep on using the word building work, not construction work, and there's a difference as I explained. All building work projects, regardless of size and duration, including higher risk buildings, which we defined earlier, now fall under these new requirements and will require the fulfillment of client, designer, principal contractor, and contractor duties. So any building work will have these duty holder role applied to it, and I'll explain how they will apply in different scenarios. Principal designer and principal contractor appointments. Now, all building work project, regardless of size and duration, which involve more than one contractor. Now you'll see the parallels between CDM. The way this has been structured is almost identical. Almost. I'm using the word almost. It's not exactly identical, but almost identical to CDM arrangements. So any project which involves more than one contractor will require the appointment of principal designer and principal contractor by the client under Building Safety Act. which is in parallel to or in addition to the CDM requirements. Now, if there's only one contractor, now all building projects, again, regardless of size and duration, which involve only one contractor, formal appointments, and the emphasis would be on the word formal. Formal appointment of principal design and principal contractor is not required. However, there is a however, principal designer and principal contractor duties are still applicable. And that's a change from CDM regulation, because in CDM regulation, if it's a project which only involves one contractor, there's no need for a principal designer or principal contractor appointment. However, under these regulations, if it's if it's only one contractor, a formal appointment by client is not required, but the duties still apply. And that's, I will explain further as we move forward. Now, on all projects, the client is required to provide a statement on completion of works when they go and seek the completion certificate really from building control, that they would confirm in writing that to the best of their knowledge, the work complies with all applicable requirements of the building regulation. Now, that will sting quite badly. Now, clients will have to sign in writing to say the work that was carried out to best of their knowledge has comply with all applicable building requirements. And that is quite stringent, quite harsh, really. And they will have to rely on professionals to confirm that they have complied with their duties in order to provide that statement. And the wording has to be cleverly written, really to not to get client roped into the liability from the Building Safety Act. Now, principal designer and principal contractor both are required now. And I'm talking about those principal designers and principal contractors which have been appointed under Building Safety Act, not under CDM regulation. Whenever I talk about the principal designer and principal contractor, I'm talking about the Building Safety Act, principal designers and principal contractors, unless I specify. Now, both duty holders now have to give a statement on completion of work, which will go along with the client completion statement to confirm that they have fulfilled their duties under the building regulations. So they have to be able to sign to say they have done their work and they have fulfilled their duties. Again, quite strong, quite stringent, and to confirm that in writing. So if anything goes wrong, the HSE will pull out this statement and say, well, look, here you go, Mr. Principal Designer, you said that you complied with your duties. Now give us your evidence. Mr. Principal Contractor, you said that the work complies with you fulfill your duties. Show us how that has complied if there's a problem. Or the client to say, Mr. Client, you give us your evidence. How you signed up a statement to say that all building work requirements have been completed, or the building regulation requirements. Show us how you done it. And that would be very difficult now. Now, domestic client projects, there are provisions on domestic client projects, and I'll come to that. What's the definition of domestic client project, which is same as CDM under CDM regulation. Again, most, not all of the client duties under the building regulation will pass on by default to the appointed principal contractor or the contractor. There are similarities, same as under CDM regulations. In CDM regulations, if it's a domestic client project, the client duties pass on to the principal contractor and the client, but all duties pass on. Under the building regulations, not all duties pass on. Most of them do, but there are still some duties that remain with that domestic client as well. And again, that's a change compared to CDM regulations. So who are the domestic client? Domestic client are the clients, a client for whom a project is being carried out, which is not in the course or furtherance of a business of that client, i.e. the work is being done purely for their own residential use or for their immediate family members. That's the definition that we use in CDM regulation and the same regulation same definition applies to this regulation as well. But again, bear in mind that not all duties pass on to the client. So the client still retains some of those duties in case of domestic client. Now, moving on, I'm on the slide 8 now. Principal design, principal contract appointment. Now, if appointments of principal design and principal contractor are not made on a non-domestic client project, then the client will have to fulfill the duties of principal designer and principal contractor. That's similar as it is CDM. If the client doesn't make those appointments of PD and PC, the client becomes the principal designer and principal contractor, which is again is not a great thing for a client, that they will be responsible also for the principal designer duties and principal contractor duties. Obviously, this doesn't apply to domestic client projects. On a domestic client projects, it's different, and again, I'll explain in next few slides. Now, existing CDM principal designer and principal contractor. Now, the client is not required under the regulations to make separate appointments of principal designer and principal contractor under the Building Safety Act if they are able to certify in writing that the existing CDM, PD, and CDM principal contractor are treated as principal designer and principal contractor, respectively, under Building Safety Act. But it's not only for client to certify. They can't just give a statement really or give it in writing. They have to confirm that with obviously the principal designer under CDM and principal contractor under CDM, that they are willing really to take on these roles under Building Safety Act as well. They can't just suddenly certify. And where the certification goes, the certification goes to the person they are appointing to certify that you are now acting as a principal designer or principal contractor, whatever the case may be under the Building Safety Act. But if it's a higher risk building, they have to give those details to the Building Control Authority as well, to HSC. So hence they have to be very careful. They can't just certify and send an email to say, oh, by the way, Mr. CDM principal designer, now you are principal designer under Building Safety Act as well. No, they have to obviously have agreement and confirmation really from the CDM principal designer, CDM principal contractor. But there is a provision that they don't have to make a separate appointment as such. It's just saving the administration really. Now, there are stringent competency requirements. As you remember, I said about the Judith review, and one of the findings was the competencies lacks and the around the chain, the system. So anyone who is making the appointment of any other person, i.e. whoever is appointing anyone really on the building work, must ensure the appointee have the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors necessary, and organizational capability. Now, most of the terms we are familiar with under CDM regulation, but the new term that has come into play is behaviors necessary. What are those behaviors necessary that are required now as part of the competency requirements? Now, necessary behaviors are that they have their compliance with the relevant requirements, including refusing to carry out any building work which is not in compliance with any relevant requirements. So they have to have a strength and confidence to say, I'm not going to carry out work because the work doesn't comply with these requirements. And that's part of the competency. Or if any design work, if the building work to which the design relates to cannot be carried out. So if the design is happening, and if someone says this is not complying with the building work and I can't carry on anymore, that's the behavior that we're asking. Now, it's quite stringent, quite harsh, if you like, again, really. The behavior also include the cooperation with other people in relation to the work. Also, again, ability to refuse to carry out work which is beyond their skill, knowledge, or experience, and asking for assistance of others where necessary. So ability to ask others if they think that this is, beyond me, but also being able to refuse in the first place, to say, look, this is beyond me. I must hold my hands up and I have to get someone else really to help me here. But those are the behaviors now which are required as part of the competency requirements. Now, what's the organizational capability? The word is already there under the CDM regulations, but it's been defined a little bit more under these regulations. Appropriate management policies, procedures, systems, and resources to ensure that those individuals who are in control of the organization, those individuals who undertake the design work or building work, are compliant with relevant skills, etc. So all the arrangements in an organization to ensure those people who they have assigned to act as a PD designer or principal contractor or contractor can fulfill those duties. And in case of individuals who are in training, the resources available to develop their skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors. And they should be appropriately supervised as well. So all those people who haven't reached to that level of competency must be supervised as a part of the organizational capability. Now, how these regulations apply, and we'll go into the depth of, and this part is quite important, and I'll have a flow diagram again to go through as we usually do under CDM regulation, as most of them may have sat in the CDM awareness CPD training with me. In the same way, I'll try to explain how these regulations apply in different scenarios. But for that to happen, I have to go through a couple of definitions with you guys so that we understand how it will apply. So when I use the word PD, or the abbreviation PD is used, that is for principal designer under Building Safety Act. PC, principal contractor under Building Safety Act. Now, if I use the word main designer, the main designer is the designer who is in control of the design phase of the project. Okay, the main contractor is the contractor who is in control of the construction phase of the project. And there's a new term the regulations use, is the lead designer. The lead designer, not under any contract, etc., or JCT, whatnot. We're not talking about that, but is a designer among other designers. So if a team of designers, so if we're sitting in a design team meetings and we have all different designers sitting, architects, structural engineer, civil engineer, M&E, etc., and among all the designers, if someone is brave enough to say, oh, by the way, I feel quite brave today, and I'm happy to fulfill the duties of principal designer under Building Safety Act, we will call that person lead designer. You can call him whatever you like, really, now that he has agreed to fulfill those duties. But the regulations use the term lead designer, is a designer who has agreed to act or fulfill the duties of principal designer. And you will see how this come into play when I'll go into the flow diagram. And this is a flow diagram similar to the one that we use for CDM regulations, with slight changes, really. I might have to reshare the slide or the flow diagram if you can't see it, really. So I will have to share, really. Okay. Guys, are you able to see any flow diagram? If you're not, let me know quickly so I can reshare it again. Can you see any flow diagram appearing on your screen?
You can see it, but it's very small.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you see it now? It should be a big flow diagram with Safescope written on top of it. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's go through it. And this is quite important. I need your attention, all of you, really, because this is quite important to understand. If we go through this flow diagram, hopefully I can clarify things much better, and hopefully it will make the situation more obvious, really, on any scenario. So let's just start on top really with the blue box, the building works project. Again, you see I'm using the word building works. I'm not using the word construction works, because as we said, they're two different things. Building works starts, or initiates, or we start. So what is to happen under this Building Safety Act new requirements is that any appointed designer or appointed contractor must make the client aware of their duties under Building Safety Act as a first requirement, right? Let's move forward. We have to ask ourselves a question: is more than one contractor involved in a project? Let's say no. At the moment, we're saying there's only one contractor. Let's quickly run through the scenarios on our right-hand side. So no. If we're saying there's only one contractor, the client is not required to formally appoint a PD or PC, which is fine, which is similar to CDM regulation. But there's, however, what is however? However is that PD and PC duties still apply. So the client doesn't have to appoint it, but duties fall on to other people. So even in a case, if it's only one contractor, no matter how small the work is, if we can take a building work where building regulations apply, the PD and PC duties will always apply, always. Whereas if it's a one contractor, the client doesn't have to make formal appointment. Sorry, I'll probably end up confusing you quite a lot really here, and you have to ask me those questions to clarify. But I'll come and explain a little bit further as we go down, and hopefully it will make sense. If it doesn't, please shout. So what happens next? And now I'm going to jump in to see how the duties will work, and I'm going to bring all those duties here in front of me. So let's follow with the client duties in blue or whatever color you may define it. Now in bold, it says client duties from left. I'm going to start, go into that last scenario. Now, again, we have to ask a question. In this case, sorry, going back again, we are on the right-hand side. We have answered the question that is more than one contractor involved. We are saying no. We say the client doesn't have to appoint PD and PC. Okay, what happens next? We have to ask ourselves, question, is the client a domestic client? Let's go through and say, yes, it's a domestic client. What happens? So we now on the extreme right-hand side, on the left of red line, red vertical line, right? Please follow me here. Now, what happens to client duties? Now, the client duties pass on by default, most of them to appointed contractor, which we said previously, most of them, not all of them. Still, client will have some duties, which I'll explain. Now, what happens to designer duties? By appointed designer. Whoever is designer appointed, they will have to fulfill those duties. Now, what happens to PD duties? Now, that's where it gets complicated. We say the client doesn't have to make formal appointments of PD and PC, but the duties still apply. And if there is one designer only, then principal designer duties fall on to that sole designer. They have to fulfill those principal designer duties. However, if there are more than one designer involved, those designers have to agree between them who will act as a principal designer, and that agreement has to be in writing, and then they have to inform the client about it. And that person who has volunteered themselves really to become principal designer or fulfill the principal designer duties, they would be called the lead designer. Okay, I'll repeat again. So principal designer duties, there's no need for a formal appointment, but if it's one designer involved in the project, they have to fulfill the principal designer duties. If there are more than one designer, they have to agree between them who will perform the principal designer duties, and that person who agrees to fulfill the principal designer duties will be called a lead designer. A lead designer is a legal term, or the term used in the regulations. Sorry to confuse you guys. Hope it makes sense now. Going down a little bit. What about the principal contractor duties? We say the formal appointment of a principal contractor is not required. However, the sole contractor appointed by default has to fulfill the principal contractor duties as well on that project. The term can be quite misleading. The principal contractor means there's more than one contractor in a way, because that's where it will be called principal contractor. But what the regulations are saying, that they will have to fulfill those duties which in another situation, principal contractor will fulfill. In this situation, if it's only one contractor, they will fulfill those duties. Contractor duties, they will apply in yellow, and they will be fulfilled by appointed contractor. Now, it gets a little bit muddy here. What about those completion statements? We say the client will give a statement that, to best of their knowledge, the building works complies with the building regulations or the relevant requirements, and the principal designer and principal contractor giving those statements. As I have read it and the training I have gone through, in fact, I haven't seen anything otherwise which suggests that a client, a domestic client, may end up also giving that statement, because there's nothing in the regulation which says the domestic client is exempt. And that's horrible, really, to think that a domestic client will end up writing something to say the building work complies with the building regulations. And I haven't seen anything otherwise. So, which I'm still myself really, not really absolutely sure how that will work, really. But that's what the regulations are saying currently, unless there is a clarification from somewhere. And a PD and PC statements will also be there, because there's already someone to perform the PD duties, which we said above. It will be the sole designer or the lead designer. And there's already someone to perform the PC duties, i.e. the appointed contractor. So hence, those statements will be required in this case as well, where it is a domestic client and is only one contractor involved. And that's the situation in this scenario, which is quite, can be quite complex in a way if you see it in that way. I hope it makes a little bit sense that, once it's been mapped out. I'm going to go up again to that question on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, to say, is the client a domestic client? And this time we're saying no, it's not domestic client, it's a commercial client. I can't use the word commercial because it doesn't mean non-domestic, but say it's non-domestic client. Now, what happens in this case? The client duties remain with the client. They don't pass on to anyone. The client has to fulfill it. The designer duties will be by appointed designer. Now, what about those PD duties? Exactly same. By the sole designer, if it's only one designer, or by lead designer, if there's more than one designer and the designers agree in writing that one of them will act as fulfill those principal designer duties. Principal contractor duties will be looked after by the the appointed contractor. The contractor duties will be by the contractor, and the completion statement are exactly same as we said in the extreme right-hand scenario. There will be a statement required from the client. There will be a statement required from PD and PC, because there are people who will be fulfilling those roles, and they will have to give a statement in writing. Guys, that's the situation where we have one contractor involved. So I went through the columns to the right of red line and a column between blue and red line. Are we clear onto that? I think we're clear as a mud really on this situation, because it doesn't make any sense on occasion. But I'm going to go up now. I'm going to talk about the project where there's more than one contractor involved. So we're going to talk about, ask the question again, is more than one contractor involved in that building work? This time we're saying yes, there's more than one contractor involved. What happens? Same like in CDM regulation, the client must appoint a principal designer. The client must appoint a principal contractor in this case, which is fine. But what happens in case of if the client is a domestic client project, or it's a domestic client project situation? Okay, let's see what happens. Let's ask another question. I'm right at the top of the screen. Is the client a domestic client? Let's say yes. So now we are in the column between green and blue line, right, guys? Now, if client doesn't appoint PD and PC in this situation, because the domestic client and it's more than one contractor, then the main designer and the main contractor become PD and PC by default. Same like in the CDM regulations. The main designer is one who is in control of the design phase, and the main contractor is one who is in control of the construction phase, become PD and PC by default. Okay. Now let's talk about the duties. What happens to the client duties in this case? So guys, again, I'll repeat, I'm talking in between green line and the blue line. So what's happening to the client duties? Mostly they will pass on to the principal contractor by default. But the regulations also give another provision that PD could agree in writing to say they are willing to fulfill those duties, which again, as in CDM regulation, there's a similar sort of provision, but I haven't heard of any case where PD has agreed that they will fulfill client duties. Similarly here, I don't expect that any PD would agree that they will fulfill the client duties in this case. And that they will pass on by default to the principal contractor. So what about the designer duties? There will be appointed designers, and they will have to fulfill those duties. I should say appointed designers rather here. What about the PD duties? By appointed PD, if the client has appointed it. If they haven't appointed it, they will pass on to the main designer by default, as we said earlier. What about the principal contractor duties? They will be appointed PC if one has been appointed. If not, they will pass on to the main contractor by default. What about the contractor duties? They will be on to the appointed contractor as usual, no change there. Completion statement, again, same like the scenario that we had on a one contractor and a domestic client. The client is still, I haven't seen again anything in the regulation which exempt them. So that means by default, they will still have to give a statement to say that the building works complies with the building regulation. And same as in the other scenarios, the PD and PC will have to give a statement to say that they have complied or they have fulfilled their duties under the regulations. And that will be the situation if it is more than one contractor and it's a domestic client. I'll also color code, behind the background is changed as well in each scenario, so you can see which scenario I'm talking about. Now we're coming to the last scenario, onto the left of the green line. We're asking the question again, is the client a domestic client? And now we're saying no, they are not domestic client. And where most of our project or the building work may fall, where we are non-domestic project situation and is more than one contractor. Now what happens is that if PD and PC are not appointed by the client, then the client must fulfill their duties, which is same like in CDM regulation. So let's see what happens to those duties. Again, I'll repeat, we are on the left-hand side of the green line. Client duties will be fulfilled by client themselves or by their advisor, etc., whatever the case may be. Designer duties by appointed designers. Should have been ACE in the thingy there, in the diagram. Or designer, if it's only one designer. Who will fulfill PD duties? By appointed principal designer. PC duties by appointed principal contractor. Contractor duties by appointed contractor. And completion statement will be given by the client, PD, and PC. There's no change there. So that's the situation when it is a non-domestic and a more than one client situation. Guys, after a few minutes, we'll take a quick break anyway. If you bear with me, I'll just go through this application. It's quite important that we understand this, and then we can take a quick break for tea to fill the tea and a cup or go to loo or something. And this is the way the regulations will apply. And that's the flow diagram. I hope this makes sense how the different requirements will apply. Please remember, this is not exactly same as the CDM regulation. There are changes. The requirements are different. We need to understand the difference really between two. Okay, are we good with this flow diagram? Unless if there's any quick question, I'll just. So hopefully you can see my slide now with a very small flow diagram. It has shrunk. So in a tabular form, we just put the same flow diagram in a table that just shows how the duties will apply in those 4 scenarios, how the different duties will apply in those 4 scenarios. And each one has been written. It's exactly the same. It's just an extract from the flow diagram in a tabular form. And the next one is exactly the same, but it just highlights the scenarios, what happens in each scenario, and who does what really in those scenarios. And that's the way the regulations will apply on from 1st of October, which has already happened. Guys, if you don't mind, if we can take a quick break for just quick 5 minutes, really, just to fill the teas and grab water, quickly nip into loo. I will come back if you don't mind, really, within 5-6 minutes, so that we can resume, rest, and complete the session. Is that okay, guys?
Should we say sort of 1:15? Would that is that okay?
Let's go for 1:15. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Enough.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you, guys. Guys, are we okay to start again? Yeah. Okay, let's go through the duties. I'm afraid this part will be a little bit dry, so you have to bear with me a little bit, so I can quickly run through it. Obviously, these are all the legal language and written in Greek, as I say, and it would be a little bit dry, but I'll try to be as quick as I can be and as simple if I can make it, really. Okay, so what are the duties on different duty holders? Guys, are you able to see the slides? And now they're changing. I'm on 1 of 4. Says BSA 22 duties on top. Right, so the duty holders, we say is client, designers, all designers in plural, principal designer. There could only be one principal designer appointed under Building Safety Act, and in theory, one other could be appointed under CDM 2015. So there could be 2 principal designers, one under CDM 2015, one under BSA 22. Principal contractor, one again, and again, there could be one appointed under CDM, one under 22 BSA, but it won't work. As we say, you can't have 2 principal contractors on a project doing 2 different things, and contractor duties apply. Now, before that, we need to establish certain definitions. The client will be required to have suitable arrangements in place, and the regulations already give a definition what those suitable arrangements are. They ensure the design complies with the relevant requirements. They ensure the building work is carried out, which will comply with all relevant requirements. When we say all relevant requirements, the relevant requirements is not a throwaway term. There's a definition to that word, relevant requirements, which I'll explain in 2 minutes. They enable designers and contractors to cooperate with each other to achieve compliance. The arrangements should be such that designers and contractors can cooperate with each other, and there is a regular review of the design and construction work, with a view that if that becomes a high-risk building, it could be notified straight away. So those are the suitable arrangements at the definition of. So what are the relevant requirements? So the word will keep on creeping, keep coming again and again. The relevant requirements, the building work must comply with the relevant requirements. The relevant requirements are defined are these duties under the building regulations. Regulation 4, Regulation 6, there's a number, and then also Schedule 1. And when we say Schedule 1, it automatically means all approved documents, because Schedule 1 is about approved documents. and all approved documents become relevant requirements. So it's quite, vast and extensive when we talk about the all relevant requirements, and they are all about the building regulations. And there's also other term used as a building information. What is the building information? And again, the regulations gave us the definition. We'll say the building information means information in the client's possession or which could be reasonably obtainable. And this includes information about the work, the planning and management of the project, the issues relating to compliance and with any other relevant requirements and how they were addressed. Now, this sounds to me more like a PCI, or pre-construction information, the one produces under CDM regulation, but it's not as extensive. For PCI, there's a proper schedule given that what should be included in the PCI, whereas here, it's described in few words, but the intent behind it appears to be same. The problem is that there's no code of practice, there's no guidance. As the benefit we have with the CDM regulation, that it came with a guidance. Here we don't have any guidance, so we don't know how this will actually work in practice. What documents will be created? How that will happen? Is this still out and open to interpretation? Now, what are the client duties? So bear in mind those definitions. A client must make suitable arrangements for planning, managing, and monitoring. We already said what those suitable arrangements are. Those suitable arrangements for planning, managing, and monitoring of a project to ensure compliance with all relevant requirements. So there have to be proper arrangements in place. A client must ensure the arrangements for planning, managing, and monitoring are maintained and reviewed. Client must provide the building information, as we said, what the definition of building information was, for project as soon as practicable to every designer and contractor. A client must cooperate with other people involved on the project to enable them to fulfill their duties. If there's more than one client on a project, there could be a situation, which is not often, but there could be more than one client. Then they have to agree between them who will become client for the purposes of these regulations. And again, not all duties will pass on to that person they have selected. There will be some that will be applicable to all the clients involved. But again, this situation will be quite rare, and we don't expect that to happen, 99% of the time. Client must make suitable arrangements to ensure information is provided to the designers and contractors on higher risk building. Now, this is to make them aware that if it's a higher risk building work, etc. But that applies to higher risk building. And again, let me remind you that all these roles, the client, the principal designer, the designer duties, the principal contractor and contractor, apply to all building work, including high risk building work. So it applies to all the building work, and these roles will be required there. However, there are some different procedural requirements for high risk building work, which again is a separate regulations. And if you're interested, then one can go through into those regulations in detail, how those procedures requirements differ compared to any other project. Now, when a client is a domestic client, in item 1 and 2, the competency of person, etc., will pass on to the appointed sole contractor. We say that when the client is a domestic, the duties will pass on to the appointed contractor, but not all of them, but most of them. Client must appoint a principal designer and principal contractor. We went through. In case the client has already appointed a CDM, principal designer and principal contractor, then they can certify in writing that those PD and PC will also be treated for Building Safety Act purposes as PD and PC, but that has to be confirmed with that relevant PD and PC, obviously. When the client fails to make an appointment, they have to fulfill those duties. As we said before, a client must take all reasonable steps to satisfy themselves that any appointment they make, the appointment is competent. They have, they fulfill competency requirement, and the competency requirement now they call it SCAPE as a abbreviation: skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors. There's you missing in behaviors, I can see. Apologies for that. and organizational capability where relevant. Now, in case of appointment of PD and PC for higher risk building, the client also has to keep a record in writing of what steps they took to ensure the appointees were competent. So everything has to be in writing. In relation to high risk building work, again, any other person who makes another appointment, so if a designer appoints a subconsultant or a contractor appoints a subcontractor, etc., or any person who is appointed, they must inform the client how the appointment were made, what reasonable step they were taken, and the client has to keep the record, in safe place really for high risk building work. Client, when submitting the notice to local authority, the work has been completed, as we gave it a term completion statement, the client has to give a statement to say, to the best of their knowledge, the work complies with all applicable requirements of the building regulation. And that's quite onerous statement to sign on behalf of client as well. Nobody can sign it on behalf of the client, obviously. The client has to sign it. Now, in case the building work which is to be occupied before completion, a statement has to confirm that certain part of the regulations have been complied. Okay, so fairly straightforward, and I think in a flow diagram we went through those duties as well. Now, designer duties. Now, what is the designer? Designer means any person, including a client as well, a contractor, or any other person who carries out the design work, or arranges for design work, or instructs any person under their control to do so is called designer. Again, an extensive definition of a designer there. Now, what are the designer duties? Designer duties start with competence. Designer must not accept any request to undertake any design work unless they are competent, unless they have the skill, knowledge, experience, and behaviors necessary. Again, you're missing there from behaviors, is American spelling, I think. And the designer must not accept the appointment if they're not competent. And the competency definition has changed in these regulations. Designers also must take reasonable steps to satisfy themselves that any further appointments they make, subconsultant, contractor, etc., that those appointees are competent, i.e. have necessary skill, knowledge, experience, and behaviors, and organizational capability where relevant. Now, in relation to high risk work, designer making appointment of any other person, etc., any subconsultant, same like before, they must give the record of the appointment, what step they took to ensure, to check the competency of the appointment. They should give the whole record to client, and client must keep in a safe manner. Where at any time, now that's again a change in the competency compared to the CDM, how CDM regulations work. If at any time a designer thinks that they are no more competent for the works they are carrying out, they have to notify the person who appointed them to say, we are no more competent. And they also have to notify that to principal designer as well, in a case that if there's more than one contractor involved. They must do that immediately. Okay, so the general duties on designer. On a domestic client project, if it's more than one contractor involved, designer who is in control of the design phase becomes the principal designer. Where there is only one contractor, then if it's a sole designer, they become principal designer. If there are more than one, then they have to decide between them. Now, I think we covered that already as well. A designer must take all reasons to ensure the design work carried out by them and by any workers under their control is planned, managed, and monitored. So the requirements for planning, managing, and monitoring now, whereas in CDM regulation, that requirement is only on two parties, which is principal designer responsible for planning, managing, and monitoring the design phase, and the principal contractor responsible for planning, managing, and monitoring the construction phase. Now, the requirement for planning, managing, and monitoring spreads throughout all duty holders, from client, designer, principal contractor to contractor. And that's a change. That's an extension of those duties, and duties have been expanded there. To have those plan management and monitoring arrangements in place, so that design is such that if the building work is carried out accordingly, would be in compliance, i.e. the design complies with all relevant requirements of building regulations. A designer must cooperate with other people involved, which is given. Now, what are those additional duties? A designer must not start design work unless satisfied the client is aware of those duties under the BSA. A designer must take all reasonable steps to ensure, the ensure has been repeated, that the design is such that, i.e. to say the design complies with all relevant requirements. A designer must take all reasonable steps to provide sufficient information about the design, construction, and maintenance of the building to assist the client, other designers, and contractors to comply with all relevant requirements. So they have to be very, very specific about the products they specify, etc. Now, instead of giving putting a placeholder to say that needs to be designed by, of course, someone else can design it, but they have to be very specific about their requirements. Where a designer is carrying out only part of the design of the building work, which comprises the project, the designer must consider the other design work which directly relates to their building work and report any concerns as to compliance with all relevant requirements to the principal designer. Now, that's quite scary to think what that means. It means that if they are designing certain part of the work, and if they see the other design work by other designers around them, and if they have any concern over that design work, they must report it to principal designer. Now that puts the onus, the responsibility on a designer that if they see any problem, they must notify it to principal designer. And I'm sure it's going to cause a lot of commotions if we started doing that. If requested to do so, a designer must provide advice to the principal designer on or the client whether any work which they're designing will become a higher risk building work. Which is to say, if what they're designing, they think that they will become a higher risk building, they should inform the client and principal designer straight away. So those are the duties of a designer under those regulations, under these regulations, which are not so different to CDM. However, the scope is different, but obviously there are some thorns and some stings really in these regulations, really to be careful with. Now, what are the principal designer duties? Kind of we touched on, but I'll go in a little bit detail. A principal designer, who's a principal designer? He's a designer, he or she or they who are designer who are in control of the design phase of the project. Okay. Competence. Again, the acronym abbreviation SCAPE will come into play: skill, knowledge, experience, and the behaviors. Principal designer must take all reasonable steps to satisfy that any appointment they make are competent. In relation to higher risk work, if they make any appointment, same like designer, they must give all the record to client and to ensure that the appointee have necessary competence. A principal designer must be competent, obviously. That goes without saying, really, that they have to have necessary competence to accept the responsibility. Where a principal designer is not an individual, so if it's an organization, they must designate, they must name the person with necessary competency to identify that that's a person which will be taking on the role of a principal designer. A principal designer must not accept the appointment if they are not competent. Now, where at any time a principal designer thinks that, look, this is going beyond my competency range, they must immediately pull out and inform the client to say, look, we are not competent anymore. And then the client is required really to make another appointment for a principal designer. Now, additional duties are: a principal designer must plan, manage, and monitor the design work and coordinate the matters relating to the design work in order to ensure that the building work is compliant to all relevant requirements. So again, that's the main and stringent requirement on a principal designer to ensure that the reasonable steps they are taking to ensure the building work is compliant with the relevant requirements. A principal designer must take reasonable steps to ensure designers cooperate with the client and other parties. A principal designer must take reasonable steps to ensure the design work of all designers is coordinated. A principal designer must take all reasonable steps to ensure the designers comply with their duties. Now, how a principal designer will do it, that's another mystery. Same like building CDM regulations. CDM regulations are well established over, from 94. Now we know what steps we have to take. But here, we don't really know how we would ensure that other designers are complying with their duties under the building regulations. A principal designer must liaise with the principal contractor and share the principal contractor any information relating to planning, managing, and monitoring and the coordination of works, which is fine. Where a principal contractor, now that becomes interesting here, where a principal contractor, we're not talking about principal designer, we're talking about principal contractor provides comments to principal designer in relation to compliance with the building regulations, i.e. the relevant requirement, the principal designer must have regard to those comments. So now that's a strange duty that if the principal contractor says, oh, by the way, here's the problem with the building regulation, etc., the principal designer must consider that, must give it a regard really. So they can't ignore it. They have to acknowledge it and do something about it. A principal designer, if requested, assists the client in providing information, i.e. building information. I think it goes without saying that they're, that will be, taken as read, that principal designer will provide the building information to other designers and contractors. A principal designer must, when their appointment ends during the project, so if the appointment finishes during the project, within a month, no later than 28 days, they must give a record to the client to say what steps they took to fulfill their duties. Now that's quite interesting because what it's saying really to principal designers that you can't walk away from the project. What you have to do is to, when you walk away from the project, you have to give a record of what you did on the project to the client. So then the client appoints other person. And what it seems to suggest that there would always be a need of a principal designer on the project. So there would always be a principal designer as required under the building regulations where applicable. Now, when the next principal designer comes in to replace the previous one, the new principal designer must review all the documentation provided by the previous principal designer to ensure the design is compliant to all relevant requirements. Now, that's a problem. The problem is that if there was a principal designer who didn't do anything or didn't do properly, then the next principal designer or the replacement principal designer taking on the role has to ensure that everything is up to scratch at that point. Now, you can imagine the situation when a new one comes in and says, look, goodness me, there's nothing, been done, and, I have to start from scratch, really, pretty much. And that's the provision in the new regulations. A principal designer, when a notice is submitted, they have to give a completion statement. As we say, that they have to write a statement to say that they have fulfilled their duties under the building regulations, relevant part 2A, etc. Okay, and there's more about the expected knowledge. I'll quickly come to that. I'm going to quickly rush through it. I know that we're a little bit tight with the time. A principal contractor, who is a principal contractor? They are contractor in control of construction phase of the project. Principal contractor duties, competence, similar to principal designer and designer. They must have necessary skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors and organizational capability. Again, in relation to high risk work, if any principal contractor makes further appointments of contractors, they must give a record to client and the client must keep it safe. A principal contractor must be competent, goes without saying. Principal contractor must not accept as the appointment to act as a principal contractor if they are not competent, if they cannot fulfill the competency requirements. Bullet point 3, where the principal contractor is not an individual, they must designate the individual who will be fulfilling those duties, managing those duties. Sorry, it says principal designer word in the end, it means principal contractor. Sorry, it's a typo there. And where at any point principal contractor cease to be competent, where they think that's beyond us, they must notify that really to client to stay away. Any person carrying out work or building work, they must ensure that there is planned, managed, and monitored. Any person carrying out building work must cooperate with other people involved in the project. Now here the main duties is taught. A principal contractor must plan, manage, and monitor the building work to ensure the building work is in compliance with all relevant requirements. Now that's a duty on principal contractor now as well, to say all the workers they're doing on site is compliant with all relevant requirements. They have a duty. It's not the duty of the designer or the principal designer only, but it's duty of a principal contractor as well to ensure that what they're doing on site is compliant to building regulations. The principal contractor must take all reasonable steps to ensure contractors and other people involved in the building work are cooperating. The principal designer must ensure that the work is coordinated among the contractors. Principal contractor must take reasonable steps to ensure they are involved in relation to building work are complying with their duties under these regulations. The principal contractor must liaise with the principal designer and share the principal designer information, etc., about the planning, managing, and monitoring. Now, what shape that information will take, that needs to be seen. Whether that will be included as part of the construction phase plan, which again, that's probably a wrong approach because this won't apply to every project that CDM will apply, but we'll see. Now, again, a reciprocal arrangement, the provision is that where the principal designer is commenting to the principal contractor's work, the principal contractor must have regard to those comments. Now, the principal contractor must, if requested, assist the client in providing the building information to other designers and contractors. A principal contractor must, with the appointment ends, no later. So if a principal contractor is gone from the equation halfway through the job, within 28 days, they have to give the client all the information back to say how they complied with these duties. So they have to give the full record to the client. And when the new principal contractor comes in, they have to check to ensure all the record the previous principal contractor gave was that good enough or not really, or if it's not compliant with all relevant requirements, or if it is, whatever the case may be. And the principal contractor to give the statement when the work is completed to say that they have fulfilled their duties as principal contractor under the building regulations. Now, what are the contractor duties? This is the last bit on the duties. I'll quickly run through it. Contractor means any person, including a client, but not a domestic client. Domestic client is not a contractor because they're not doing it for business. Who is in the course of a business carries out or manages or controls any building work is called contractor. They must not, if they're not competent, they must not accept the appointment as a contractor. Contractor must take reasonable steps to ensure that they are themselves competent in relation to high-risk building work. Whatever further appointments they make, they must give record to the client. And as like before in other duty holders, if they are not competent anymore for the work, they must notify that straight away to the principal contractor. And on a domestic client project, if they are the only contractor, they must become the principal contractor and perform those duties. On a one contractor job, the contractor would also be treated to be acting as fulfilling the principal contractor duties, also looking after the client duties as well. And a contractor must take all reasonable steps to ensure the building work carried out by them is planned, managed, monitored, so that it's in compliance. A contractor must cooperate with others. Now, there are some other duties quickly. Contractor must not start work unless satisfied the client is aware of their duties. Contractor must ensure the building work they're carrying out is compliant with the building regulations. So the requirement goes on to every duty holder. A contractor must provide each worker under their control appropriate supervision, instruction, and information so as to ensure the building regulations are complied with. And in addition, in relation to building work, contractor must take a reasonable step to ensure the information about the work to assist the client and other contractors to comply. So sufficient information is provided to other parties for their work. Especially this is relevant really where there's a golden thread information required from principal contractor and contractor. That's where the requirement comes in. And where a contractor is carrying out only part of the building work, which comprise, now that's again a very important to understand. The second bullet point, where a contractor is carrying out only part of the building work, which comprises of a project, the contractor must consider the other work which is directly related to their building, to that building work, and report any concerns as to compliance with. So if they think that the building work around them is not compliant with the building regulations, they must inform that to the principal contractor. Now that is again a very scary thought really how that will work and how the contractors will be raising the concern about other contractors. Now, if requested to do so, the contractor must provide advice to principal contract client on to whether their work will be a high risk work, which is, probably further down the chain. Okay, so these are the duties, guys, under the building regulations. Now we'll quickly finish the remaining slides very quickly now. Now, what is the expected knowledge of a principal designer? Now, there's a question. Can an existing CDM principal designer with knowledge of CDM regulations and other construction health and safety related legislation can fulfill the competency requirements and duties of a principal designer under BSA? Can they do it? What can someone please shout and say yes, no, whatever? There's no right really. I'm not checking really, but just to get me started. Can they just take on the role of a principal designer under BCA? The answer would be no, because as we said, the focus of these regulations is different. They are as long as they are competent, they understand the Building Safety Act, they understand the building regulations, etc., and they fulfill those requirements, they can't take on both roles really. However, HSE expects the same person or organization who is taking on the principal designer role under CDM should carry on this role, not necessary, but there's an expectation that they should be, do it as long, and again, that's conditional, as long as the competency requirements and organizational capability requirements can be met. So obviously not every principal designer can take on both roles. They have to be an organization which can satisfy those both set of competency requirements. Now, what are the relevant requirements? So that's what the principal designer need to know, all the relevant requirements under the building regulations and Schedule 1. And that's the Schedule 1, which is all the approved documents under Building Safety, Building Regulations 2010. And the principal designer need to understand, what those approved approved documents are and how they are to be implemented. Now, someone went on the APS, Association for Project Safety, and mapped out what a principal designer need to know under Building Safety Act. And they came up with that there are 54 documents and about 649 different codes and standards that they are expected to have a workable understanding, not a thorough knowledge, or not really, every bit of it. Under building, British standard, this and this, you can know, at least have a workable knowledge of all those regulation and the standards and the codes, etc. Okay, competency criteria. There are other documents that have come out by British standards. There's a core competency criteria. You may have come across the word, the BSI 8670. There is one for the principal designer, which is called PAS 8671. And there's one for principal contractors as well, which is 8672. And these competency criteria standards are written for these roles, not for CDM, but for these roles. Now, there's understanding the RIBA are initiating a register for principal designers So the principal designer can demonstrate competency for both CDM 2015 and Building Safety Act 22. And it's also expected, and that's again important to know, the SSIP certification, i.e. chairs, SMAs, etc., they will change as well, because now they have to show their registration will include the requirements of the Building Safety Act as well. So there will have changes coming in the pipeline for all these different requirements under chairs and SMAs and all the SSIP accreditation member requirements. What are the transitional arrangements in place? So now these new roles and duty holders do not apply if the building work has already started before 1st of October. And one may argue, what is the term started means? And secondly, and I'll come to that, and if the building work in relation to which the plans have been already deposited with the local authority. So already the plan has, it's a full plan application and the plans have already gone to a local authority. Then the building, these duty holders role don't apply, or a building notice has been served to local authority before 1st of October, as long as the construction work starts by 6th of April. So if the plans have been submitted, but the work doesn't start by 6th of April, they still have to have the new duties. If the work starts before 6th of April, then they don't need to have the duty holders. Do you understand? It's a little bit convoluted, really. But if the work has already started before 1st of October, the duty holder role don't apply. They don't apply retrospectively. For any building where already plans have been submitted with the local authority, the regulations don't, the new duty role don't apply as long as the site work starts before 6th of April next year. If the work doesn't start 6th of April, they will have to make appointment, or they can anticipate or estimate there's no chance for work to start by 6th of April. They should make these appointments. Okay, so what the work is started? There are a number of different definitions. You can pick and choose, really. Where's a complex work, then or the first stage of the complex work, then the foundation supporting the building and the structure of the lowest floor of the building are completed, then it's the work is started. And the complex buildings means which is to be constructed on the same foundation, plinth or podium as any other building, a building which is more than 1 story below ground level, a building which is a public building serving 100 visitors. Or where the work consists of a construction of a building which is not complex or a horizontal extension of the building, the work is to be regarded as commenced or started when the subsurface structure of the building or the extension, including all foundations, any basement level, and the structure of the ground floor level is complete. For any other building work, the work is to be regarded as commenced where a statement set out detail of the work which the client considers amount to 15% of the proposed works is completed. Then we say the work has started. There are other definitions as well. Local Authority Building Control, LABC, have come up with their definition, and there's Department of Leveling Up Housing and Communities have given the definitions as well. And there are slides out there. I'm not going to go through into those details. There are a couple of slides there to show, or what's the definition of where the work has started. If you like, I can send you, or they're available on their website as well. Okay, so that's it, guys. I know it was a little bit intense, and to go through everything, and we needed these 2 hours really because there was a lot to cover. I hope we've done justice to this. Again, I haven't gone into depth of everything because there was a lot to cover, but just like a quick snapshot, quick understanding of where we stand in terms of these regulations, etc. There are 5 questions that I'm going to ask from all of us. Again, they're not to check the our memories, etc., whatnot, but just have a quick understanding that what we got from this. So it gives me a measure whether we I communicated and conveyed everything in the way I was expecting to do, but also give you a little bit idea whether you are at the right place in terms of your understanding, or you need to strengthen it anymore, etc., whatnot. But again, having said that, it's a huge topic. The Building Safety Act is huge, and to cover, each and everything within 2 hours is almost impossible. Guys, even covering this thing in 2 hours, I have rushed really in so many things really quite quickly, and my throat is just sort of disappearing as well. Okay, before I take any questions, can I quickly run through these 5 questions? And, please, can you just shout away the answer you have in mind? And again, I'm not judging anyone really, so just shout whatever you think really. Question 1. Now, for each and every construction work where CDM principal designer and CDM principal contractor are appointed, it is now required to appoint a principal designer and principal contractor under Building Safety Act 22 as well. True or false? Shout away, guys.
True.
No, sorry, false. Anyone? True category?
False.
Guys?
It's false, because construction work's different to building work, isn't it?
Correct. So it's a false statement. The BSA applies to building work, not the construction work. So I'm trying to emphasize the definition, right? Question 2. A principal designer appointed in writing for CDM 2015 is by default required to act as a principal designer under Building Safety Act, because as there cannot be 2 separate principal designers on a project. True or false?
False.
Anyone?
False.
Anyone for true category, guys? No? Okay. You're right, it's false statement, because for CDM, you can't have more than 2 principal designers, but you can have 2 principal designers, 1 appointed under CDM, 1 under Building Safety Act. 3. Are principal design and principal contractor duties applicable for building work which are for a domestic client and involve only 1 contractor? Yes or no? Do the duties of principal design and principal contractor apply to a domestic client project which involves only 1 contractor?
True.
True.
True,
Yes.
yeah.
Anyone know?
And it's down to the contractor.
As down to the contractor, correct? So the answer is duties do apply, and the roles, they go by default to other people. So principal designer duties go to a sole designer, and principal contractor duties to a sole contractor. But duties apply. So principal designer and principal contractor duties apply regardless of whatever scenario is, but it applies to other people. Quickly, question 4. On a domestic client project which involve more than 1 contractor, the duties of Building Safety Act principal designer by default will fall onto which designer? Sole designer, designer in control of the design work as agreed among designers, or onto a CDM principal designer? Guys, shout away. A, B, C, or D?
C.
C. Any other bidders, please? So it's a domestic client project. So we're talking about scenario which is 3rd from the right. So we have more than 1 contractor, and it's a domestic client project. Any other one, guys? Answer is B. Designer in control of the design phase, i.e. the main designers. So guys, my suggestion would be to go through the flow diagram a little bit, but just there's so many variations really one needs to understand really. Last question. Principal design and principal contractor statements on completion of the project must be signed on all projects, including domestic client projects and the projects involving only 1 contractor. Is that true or false?
True.
True. Any bidders for false, please? No? It's true. Because the requirements apply to every project, every scenario as well. Guys, any quick firing question? If obviously we're finishing at 2, so we've got only 2 minutes. If any question, please by all means, drop me on the email. I'll try to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll try to find the answer. One thing I would request, if you don't mind, please give me a feedback. Please let me know how the session was. Only the reason I'm asking is that then I can improve the next session. We already got one lined up for Friday. If any feedback, please let me know, because that will help me really to make the next session better, improve it, cover whatever areas I didn't cover. Please, 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 I request you, Ray, that please drop me a line, drop us a line, really quickly give us even if it's a 2-word, feedback that will help us so that we can improve, we can make it better. And the aim is just to try to convey the information, the knowledge as much as we know to all parties, etc., to see what we understand. And if you need any help with the BSA, roles, etc., sorry, I don't mean to market in that way, but just quickly throwing in really, that if you need the client advisor, PD role, or principal contract advisor role under BSA, we are offering those roles along with the CDM regulations as well. So we'll be happy to help really. Guys, any quick question I'll take. If not, thank you so much for joining.
Over to everybody.
Sorry.
Could that presentation be dropped over by either you or Lindsay?
The presentation, we will look into the what bits of it we can throw out, because we're still evolving it, we're still changing it based on viewer feedback. But we'll aim to send as much information as we can. That could include the slides as well, the handouts to all who participated really. So especially the flow diagram and the tables, etc., we'll send out really to everyone. We'll do that. Guys, any other question before we finish? I hope you found it useful, guys. Hope it was useful.
Yeah.
Hope
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, it's really helpful. I'm sure a number of us have questions, but for BCR Infinity's point of view, thank you very much. And we'll combine some of our questions and put them back. I think it's important transition, and there'll be a lot of questions and a lot of learning amongst us all. So yeah, and the industry.
Sure.
But thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I'll look forward, like I said, any question, even if you think is, in your mind is naive, is not naive, is, because that will help me really to understand, so that we can.
No problem. I'm sure we've all noted down a few, but you've exhausted your voice, so we won't carry on. We'll put through some nice simple questions, just so we're as clear as we can be at this stage. But thank you very much.
No problem at all. No, thank you.
Have a good weekend as well.
Very kind of you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Much.
Cheers all. Have a lovely
nice
weekend.
Evening, a nice weekend as well, guys. All of you. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.